Welcome to the Pharma Sales and Tech Podcast. Tune in to stay informed, inspired, and connected with the world of pharma sales.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Stefan. I'm here with Platforce, and I have a wonderful guest for whom I've been waiting for maybe around 2 months, actually. His name is Shawn Malloy, and I would really love to interview him about his role as VP of Marketing at Lindus Health. But I think Shawn will do his intro in a much better way than I will. So, Shawn, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Stan. As you mentioned, I'm VP of Marketing at Lindus Health. We like to call ourselves the anti-CRO for life science pioneers. And for those of you familiar with the CRO industry, they're basically clinical research organizations that run clinical trials on behalf of, your typical pharma, biotech, digital health, or med device company. So effectively what we do is we look to run clinical trials in a much faster, more efficient way using technology and new age techniques that your standard CRO, usually wouldn't be involved with. And also with an incentivization structure based on the pricing that basically allows us all to win versus just, as studies typically go longer, CROs get paid more and we kind of take the opposite approach. So, I've been in sort of the CRO industry the past 5 years. And prior to that, I actually worked in big pharma for about 6 years. I worked at companies like AbbVie, Amgen, and Biogen prior to that. So, it's just a bit about myself.
Awesome. Thank you, Shawn. So, before actually starting this podcast, we've discussed with Shawn, topics that he's really passionate about. And he was saying that he's really passionate about marketing and sales targeting and how that sort of fuels into sales activities. So let's start with that, Shawn.
Yeah, definitely. So as you mentioned, Stefan, basically, what I've found are the best types of sales that we do that have the highest level of velocity and also the highest win rate are typically really well aligned to the overall marketing strategies that we have. So, if both sales and marketing are targeting in synchrony, a particular market segment, let's say, we're going after dermatology, small molecule trials or what have you. And we have a thought leader, that marketing is placed in the space, talked on a lot of conferences, doing a lot of promotion and what have you. There's a whole wealth of collateral that the sales team can then use in a lot of their conversations with these pharmaceutical companies to say, hey, we have this great KOL that, has been on the conference circuit for dermatology, can bring them into those conversations with the sales leads. And generally speaking, what you see is you just, again, have a much higher velocity in the sales cycle, in addition to higher win rates when you just have a really good fit between the marketing and the sales strategy.
Awesome. So I was thinking, let's get a little bit more practical. I was thinking the first question I would ask is do you have any examples of a successful marketing slash sales strategy that you've implemented in the past in any of the companies you're willing to share, maybe any of that?
Yeah, definitely. So kind of in a similar vein to what I described, basically I select a target market for our overall marketing strategy and where we thought we could have pretty good sales that was a fit within our ideal customer profile. And so this target market happened to be digital therapeutics. So running studies for prescription digital therapeutic studies, it's a pretty unique space that not a lot of people have had experience in. And so there's a lot of what I call white space where you can help define, the approaches and the strategies where there isn't a lot of precedent. So basically what we did is we got involved with one of the industry consortiums, the Digital Therapeutics Alliance, and essentially worked with them to produce some of the guidance necessary on how you actually go about running studies. So we had a very specific thought leader that we had selected in the space. She worked with them to put together the industry paper that actually was a part of the FDA's process of putting through their own type of draft guidance to basically set the stage for how these types of prescription digital therapeutic studies would need to be run in the future. And so what you're able to do with that is not only contribute to, furthering a particular industry overall, but you set yourself as sort of pioneers and thought leaders in a space that now, instead of constantly going out and prospecting and hunting for leads in spaces that you might, have a pretty significant uphill battle, you now have a resource that you can lean on to say, hey, any sort of sales prospect that is in the funnel, can utilize this resource to help guide the potential prospect in how they would run their study, what they're potentially looking for in the pitfalls and what have you. So now there's a lot more inbound and a lot, again, I would say higher velocity and easier conversion of those types of leads. And so that's a type of strategy I've seen work well, and I'd like to replicate in different market segments where you basically become an expert in a particular area, so that you can again provide the resources that you need downstream from marketing to sales.
That's where I was actually when I first came into platforms, I came from SaaS, software as a service business, which is very much like very, very advanced. And I worked before in pharma, but it was a different position. When I came as a head of marketing for platforms, my first guess was like why there is so little content, like subject matter expertise in the pharma space from pharma leaders. I mean, there are Reuters conferences, there are conferences, but you can't really find like opinion pieces, which is, internet is full of SaaS opinion pieces from coming from, from leaders. And my first move was start this podcast. Then I got our CEO on a lot of podcasts because he does have a lot of knowledge about the market. And it's so bad that, people don't know about it. So leveraging subject matter expertise is very important. In fact, I was in the Philippines like back in August, and we went to a conference, and I realized that I met a company. It's called Medical Channel Asia, and what
Mm.
they do is they create content for pharma companies. And he mentioned the topic that he said, look, pharma companies do have a lot of subject matter expertise, but they have no idea how to distribute that.
Yep,
No,
absolutely.
no idea at all. I'm like, yeah, but they have all this budget and stuff. He says, yes, but they all like they're really bad with like modern distribution systems, like like social media and things like that. And I was like, okay, but like, don't they have? If they have money, like how do they do that? And he says, well, a typical pharma company would approach, let's say, WebMD, or they would create Mayan clinics, or like someone who's on top of the Google search,
Yep.
and ask them, hey, can you feature us? And they'll say, no, hell no. We have our own subject matter experts. Like,
Mhm.
get out of here. So what they do is these guys, Medical Channel Asia, so they actually create the distribution for pharma companies. And I think they're doing a very good job. I wish there was more of that in pharma.
Definitely. I mean, I speaking from someone that was worked within pharma, I worked in a couple of different assets, and we always had like a very strong key opinion leader, like from medical affairs or what have you. And sometimes they were like the leading expert in a particular disease space. Like, I remember working on the Spinraza asset at Biogen, and, we had some of the most well-renowned experts in spinal muscular atrophy across the globe, but there was just never, to your point, any sort of like distribution of the message and really like teaching and those learnings, through the traditional channels, certainly like, talking with other KOLs on advisory boards and panels and what have you. But the more sort of like modern techniques of distributing thought leadership were just like pretty deficient at that point. So I think there's a lot of potential there. It's not that the thought leaders don't exist within pharma, but they, to your point, need sort of like a kick to get this sort of better distribution that, they're just not getting right now.
Yeah, plus, I guess they're a bit scared because you get all this media attention, and there is.
True. Yep.
I've had a podcast guest. I don't know who is that, but like she was envied by their colleagues. They're like, wow, we envy you that you got on the podcast. And the podcast is not a big thing. It's just you get here and just like say something. And I assume a lot of, again, it's a hypothesis of mine that pharma leaders do get that sort of like attention from other people in the company, and they're just not comfortable because of so much envy, and it's just so unusual for pharma.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot of inertia of this is just how things have always been and just is a little bit uncomfortable. But yeah, hopefully, like there'll be a few innovators that can kind of break into it and just set the precedent for everyone else.
Yeah, I hope that's already happening. So I've met a few of these people on conferences, but it's not going as fast as one would want that. But again, we are in a good stable sort of like curve. I wanted to ask you, like, so you're in marketing, and you work with sales very closely, right? Like, how do you guys use data and analytics to like inform each other's decisions? Funnel the right maybe use MQLs, SQLs. I don't know what sort of like funnel to use. Like, can you explain more about that?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say, the most important thing is looking at the entire funnel end to end, like the first cycle stage. So as you mentioned, like where marketing is qualifying leads all the way through to, sales closing business. So the key for us is to really just say, when we look at the different stages of conversion within the funnel, what do those conversion rates look like? And maybe tease out some of the reasons why conversion rates might not be as high as they could be, and that generally tells you a couple of things, like whether or not you're hitting the right target audience, or there are problems with the product that you're actually delivering, or there are differences between, what a client is expecting versus what you're actually proposing. So, for example, if we start with MQLs and how we convert them to sales engaged leads, like generally, like when you look at the total conversion rate between what marketing is engaging with, a particular prospect with, and to what they eventually are talking with sales leads, the type of substance and subject matter, that needs to be consistent. And if you see they are readily converting down to after an SQL stage to a proposal stage, then that tells you that the marketing work that you've been doing up front is pretty well aligned with warming up the lead, and that they're in a position that they want to buy something that you're actually offering. So the discovery call has happened. And if the conversion rate is very high from that SQL to a proposal, then you can say, okay, there is a lot of alignment with where basically like that prospect's head is with all the marketing material that's been filled in it, and with what their expectations are that the sales rep has basically delivered, that, hey, this is what we sell. And then they're going to say, yes, we want a proposal. And you can see differences in the data between the channels that you're using and how effective they are at translating those conversion rates. So, I can give some examples about just basically like search intent when you're doing SEO or any sort of, I'd say, yeah, like really downstream marketing where someone says, Google best CRO in the dermatology space. Those are people that are clearly looking for a solution. Like they already know that they want to buy something that a CRO offers and in a particular area. So we would see extremely high conversion rates from MQL to SQL to eventually a proposal delivered, because you're in the psychology of the search intent of that particular person is saying, I want to buy something at this moment. So therefore this channel is getting a lot of those types of people, versus maybe we're just running some LinkedIn ads, and, they have like a general guide on how to set up a study in a particular space. And then what happens there is maybe the conversion rate is not as high to delivering a proposal, because they're more in just like the discovery mindset of just kind of figuring out what they want to do, but they're not sure exactly what they need at that point.
Oh, Sean, you discovered the Americas for me. Joking. I knew that. I mean, look, I guess maybe for me and you, it's quite obvious, but like looking into pharma companies, even pharma companies who sell like B2B to pharma, they don't really know. They're very much, so let's say the pharma space is very much focused on like HCP engagement. So like you have
Mhm.
an HCP and you sort of like try to engage them through multi-channel or omni-channel, right? And when you talk to them about like MQLs, SQLs, different stages of decision making in that and so on, they sort of like get lost. Believe me, I've interviewed a lot of like pharma and like a lot of marketing and sales leaders in pharma. And my discussion stops where we discuss about like omni-channel. That's
Mm.
maximum where it gets. We don't get to decision making. We don't get to SQLs. We don't get to any of that. So thank you so much for bringing this subject matter expertise here. It's very rare.
Yeah,
I hope.
yeah. It's unfortunate that it is like that in the industry. What I've found is just there's sort of like, broader business based disciplines are just not applied in an industry where it's just sort of like niche scientifically focused. And I think just, I'm an engineer by training, and I worked on developing a lot of these types of drugs. And I think the marrying of those two worlds is really important for us to just sort of like have the business realize its full potential.
Yeah, I agree. There is money in pharma. There is very smart people in pharma, extremely smart. I think we just what we're doing with the podcast as well. Like I'm trying to educate the market about all the possibilities, all the great content you guys can get out, all the opportunities, all the engaging stuff you can teach your HCPs on or like
Yeah.
pharma overall. Better be better. I'm trying to get our listeners to get better at doing business in pharma. So,
Yeah, it makes
mm,
sense. It's definitely
how do
needed.
you like? I have a question. So, how do you guys? So, if marketing and sales are sort of like talking to the customers, how do you make sure that there is one channel and you guys don't have ambiguity in the messages you send to your customers or potential customers, maybe? How
Yeah.
do you sort of manage that?
Yeah, definitely. So whenever marketing launches a campaign, generally what we try to do is we set forward the voice of customer motivation before we even like create any kind of content, right? So we say, you know, who exactly are we going after? What are their particular characteristics? What are their motivations? Are they interested in, are they interested in cost? Are they interested in experience? What are their challenges that they're facing? And so doing that exercise with sales helps kind of set like the buying motivations and how we create content across the entire continuum. And what I mean by that is, you have your top of funnel content that marketing is pretty much only doing, like maybe let's say you write some blogs on a particular topic, or, you're going to host a webinar, what have you on, the subject in that space. And then you want to make sure that aligns as you articulated with the message that's downstream. So that even gets into like the sales collateral in the sales deck. So what we'll do is we'll basically take a content strategy as sort of ubiquitously across commercial and make sure it aligns to that initial voice of customer and go to market strategy and say within the sales deck, are we saying, that we're offering the same things that we're offering, like on the website and what have you. But more importantly, like, are those motivations aligned? So if we're going to take one particular market segment. Let's say it is medical devices and, running studies in medical devices. What are the most important things to this particular segment? Let's say for them, it is, speed of patient recruitment. So is the recruitment element being reflected in both the upfront marketing materials as well as those pitch decks that the sales team is using to say, these are some of the biggest challenges in medical device, studies, and these are the ways that we're handling it with these certain patient recruitment techniques and medical devices. So that way, that prospect is hearing the same message over and over and over again from the time that they've first heard about your company to the time that they are getting a proposal delivered that to them from a sales lead.
Mhm. That's a nice way to actually approach this. Thinking about, do you have a pre-sales team? Who's on your pre-sales team, and do you have anything like that? And who's on pre-sales team? How do you guys work with your pre-sales?
Yeah. So basically, a couple of things before sales is essentially, your like traditional marketing organization that does content generation, promotions, whether that's like advertising, events, et cetera, et cetera. But then you also have what I would call your development team or your like internal sales team, which are more like your outbounding sort of resources. And so what they do from a pre-sales perspective is they're actually actively going out there and they're finding prospects that, are within the certain accounts that you have said, hey, this is our market space that we want to target. And they're proactively reaching out to them with the same type of messaging that you might be doing for inbound campaigns. Whereas in the inbound campaigns, you're mostly relying on the traffic to come to you. So it's kind of like a mixed approach with outbound and inbound channels in order to basically like not only solicit actively, potential leads into, convertible sales leads, but then also just more passively allowing people to, come to you based on where they found your message across various channels, whether that's, search or conferences and what have you.
Awesome. So, like, actually, what we do at Bloodforce is that whenever we run a web event, I ask all the C-level execs plus sales to connect with all the webinar participants on LinkedIn so they stay in touch, because
Hmm.
I think the level of like, you got to have a lot of relationships in especially in pharma, if you want to close that lead. So relationships are twice as important as in maybe other industries, because it's also very conservative, right? And I would say that the only fact that we connect with all these people who went to the webinar and we asked them about, well, how did you guys feel about the webinar? Like, are there any hand raisers? Are there any like comments? Maybe there are other topics you want to hear about, right? So we can bring in the right influencers, the right subject matter experts, so we can talk about all that stuff. I think that the only fact that we sort of try to connect with all those people and try to sort of create this, I'd say, community, right? Community, because that's my final goal, to create a community of people who want to like develop pharma and have a better way of doing business. So I think it leans very well into like sort of like where you flip the inbound for outbound, and where, you don't have sort of like a borderline between inbound and outbound. It's like all in one.
Yeah, yeah, definitely having them work in tandem is super important to your point. Yeah, in this particular industry, especially, we can't rely on a lot of the, what you'd see more in B2C markets where, effectively you just put out a ton of marketing materials and the consumers are really just the ones driving the entire sales process from, interest to checkout. But here, in a very B2B, more white glove sort of, sales process, you want to make sure that are we engaging these people at an individual level, and that inbound and outbound are sort of working in tandem in order to make sure that there's a more seamless transition from that sort of just like interest that's being expressed on their own accord to you kind of actively helping them along the journey and showing that, you are taking an active interest in what they're trying to learn. And then that feathers them into the deeper, funnel of the sales process.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I totally agree with you. So a question is like, how do you sort of keep on innovating and experimenting with your sales team within marketing and sales?
Yeah, I'd say, what's important to do is I take the approach, as I think it's part of my engineering background, is just to try a lot of different things and then let the data sort of sort it out. So what I basically do is that we start with, omni-channel approaches in any kind of campaign that we'd run. And again, across inbound and outbound with different techniques. There are a lot of established channels that, I've already mentioned here, but essentially, what we need to do is constantly look to innovate. And when I look for innovation, I'm looking for how do we automate the things that we don't need to spend a lot of like critical thinking time on, like really where our like gray matter capacity should be geared towards. And so that frees up more of our creative thinking and where we can try different techniques and what have you. So I'm a big fan of automation wherever possible. Like I'm especially on the outbound side, I'm always looking for new techniques about how we personalize, but also automate at the same time. So where can we, deliver appropriate LinkedIn messaging or emails to individual prospects that show that there is some level of catering to the individual. Like maybe they're working on these kidney studies and they're at a particular phase. And I want to make sure that like some of that messaging reflects that we actually understand what they're looking to do. But at the same time, maybe there are 500 of those prospects and you want to make sure that you're not like wasting your time spending, hours and hours sending 500 individual messages. So basically a lot of AI tools have been coming out recently that I think are really cool and sort of help with, putting the messaging together to the right audience, but then also automating the tasks that don't require a lot of critical thinking for us to, actually deliver the messages.
About the AI, that's the question I was going to ask next. Okay. So how do you personally look at ChatGPT and AI, the spark in AI throughout the last year? And do you use that for your, in your daily job? Like, do you recommend people? How do you use it? Most interestingly, I'd like to hear that.
Yeah, definitely. So there are kind of two areas where there are like AI applications in my world. So basically, like the first is in the products that we actually deliver. So as I mentioned before, we are taking the approach of a CRO and trying to optimize it as much as possible so that, you can run studies faster and more efficiently. And one of those areas that we do that with is protocol development. So we've developed like a machine learning algorithm, an AI tool where basically you can speed up the protocol process by taking a load of data that's just on clinicaltrials.gov and being able to say, hey, these are the inputs that, I'm saying the study, it needs to be within these parameters, and it can take that data and generate a protocol for you that fits those parameters. And so this is normally a process that takes a really long time and a lot of individuals just, writing and rewriting over and over again. And you can get, within 95% of a finished product by just putting in a couple simple inputs in a few minutes. And that's just one example of how we're using AI to basically speed up the clinical trial process. Now,
Mhm.
interestingly, like, because, I'm a marketer and I'm involved in sales, like where we want to use AI tools in marketing and sales is kind of cool is, again, like how we can take complex messaging that's necessary for this industry. Like people, especially in pharmaceuticals and biotech, don't like getting just like blanketed by this sort of thing and just expect a shotgun approach. Like we were talking about before, it needs to be very personalized and tailored. And so where you see a lot of those applications for AI is being able to learn as much as it can about a company, where it's at. For us, let's say like the stage of the company, what sort of different products they have in the pipeline. So you can create the messaging with AI to say, hey, well, this would resonate with this type of company most about, delivering for phase 3 studies in the kidney space. And these are the types of things that you need to look out for. And so we can use these AI tools in order to create that more customized creative messaging to those prospects when we're doing it, especially the outbound campaigns, as I mentioned.
Yeah, I also use ChatGPT for outbound campaigns for basically messaging. Like helps me sort of come out with the right messaging. It comes with like creative ideas that I can use further on. But I wouldn't say I still feel pretty much that it's very robotized, right? Like
Sure.
I wouldn't the exact message that it spills out, I wouldn't go to a customer or to an
No,
HCP.
no. Yeah, you have to do some modification for sure. And oh, sorry. I was going to say, another area where it works in a very similar fashion to the way that you mentioned is when you're, optimizing for your search engine rankings and whatnot. SEO has proven like a pretty significant area where AI is useful. Like if you give, for example, like ChatGPT, keep it very simple, a bunch of inputs of certain keywords that you want to rank for, and coming up with a coherent topic and, a narrative that incorporates as many of those words and optimizing for SEO as possible, you'll get a pretty good sort of like 95% of the way there product that optimizes for those SEO components. But then to your point, you can do some final refinement and glossing over where essentially like you can put it in such a position that it is ready to post, but you're getting the bulk of the work sort of done with the AI tools that you need.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Yeah, in pharma, like whoever I've asked, like people don't on a personal level. A lot of people use AI, but on a company level, there's so much fear, and the fear is based on basically nothing. It's like, oh, they're gonna take our jobs. Well, not
Yeah.
really. The AI does not have your subject matter expertise, which is in your head, right? It's not like online.
Yeah,
That's correct.
that's why, like I see with AI and generally just like my interest in tools in general is to where can we take the tasks that don't require like an enormous amount of critical thinking and use AI to automate as much as possible. And to your point, yeah, it will lead to some people having this fear that they're going to like lose their jobs, but that's generally in the spaces where those processes can be streamlined and highly automated with AI. But, I think it also frees up the sort of like critical thinking resources where you can apply them in areas where we can be more creative and what have you, and leave those other tasks to the AI to automate it out, so to speak.
Yeah, that's for sure. I was going to ask you, how do you manage your like MQ like sort of MQLs and SQLs, right? Like how do you nurture them and how do you help sales with this sort of like with the materials you create in marketing? Let's focus on this.
Yeah. So generally speaking, when an MQL comes in, let's say like a totally naive MQL that they've just downloaded a case study, they've attended a webinar for the first time, something like that. And now the goal, to your point, is to how do I get them into a first sales call and qualified, and using marketing techniques, we can nurture them to that point. So what's important I do is really like segmenting, what the MQL characteristics are. So basically like there are a couple of different things, what industry are they coming from? What title do they have? And then, what type of content have they engaged with? And you can, so I use like HubSpot, for example, and can segregate based on those different characteristics of the profile, what nurture stream they should go into. So let's say, for example, they're from a big pharmaceutical company and they're focused on like diabetes. So I have a lot of content in this, pharma diabetes nurture that it will automatically send based on their profiles to an email marketing nurture where they'll get a consistent cadence of content that starts with more top of funnel and says, hey, here's some additional resources, maybe like, thanks for attending the webinar or whatever it was before. Here's some additional resources in the diabetes space. Maybe we have like a guide on how to set up a diabetes study. Maybe we have some interesting article about, what are different modalities of drugs being tested in the diabetes space. And then, set up that sort of like a drip campaign where you'll maybe within a couple of the days touch back with them and provide them with another additional interesting nugget, but always have a call to action where they can, book a time immediately with the sales team. What I like to do is basically shortening the amount of clicks and actions it takes for someone to get on a call with the sales lead, because basically if they are in the headspace where they are ready to talk, you want to make sure that you take advantage of that momentum and pull them through. So basically, like, what I'd always do is make sure within those nurtures, you're giving people the opportunity to immediately convert. And that's with having those well-placed CTAs to say, if you want to like talk more, or if you have a study design in mind, you can click this button and then you can directly book on, one of our sales leads calendars and what have you. And so the important thing is to just constantly during that nurture period, keep yourself top of mind, because they may not be ready to buy immediately, but maybe like, and especially because clinical trials, it just takes so long. Maybe they'll be ready to buy in a couple months, but having them in your, like your listserv or on your newsletter distribution or what have you, uh, eventually that is sort of like a way in the background to just keep your brand constantly top of mind for them. And again, just having the ability for them, if they are ready at any given point, to click the right CTA and be able to, book time with your sales lead if again they're ready to do so.
That's the right strategy to do it, right? Hopefully our listeners are listening and actually trying to practice that and implement, because implementation, execution is the hardest part. If you guys want to learn more, then you can, I guess you can DM Shawn here and he'll teach you how to do that.
Absolutely.
Awesome. I have my last, actually, two questions for you, Shawn. And basically, how do you stay up to date to like latest sales and marketing, like tools, technologies, sort of tactics?
Yeah, it's a good question because, there's not the type of thing where you can just attend classes or anything like that. And, what I've generally found is I have a network of people that are on the ground, my sales development reps and, my marketing, content generators and what have you, that I basically tell them, always look for how to do something differently, as opposed to just, sometimes we get in the regimen of just doing things the same way over and over again. So I do encourage them to go out into the market and just kind of see like how other people are doing things, whether that's like trying to observe some of our competitors, or even in interviews. What I like to do, interestingly enough, is I always ask whenever I'm interviewing a candidate for a sales and marketing position, I always say like, what do you think is a tool that I've never heard of and that, you have tried and think that there's a lot of utility in? And so I, I, I have these sort of like subtle ways of discovering things. I wish that almost like as a marketer, there was a lot more marketing for these types of tools so that it was easier to discover. But I've generally found like using some of just like your network and just like self motivation with your team, that to constantly go out and explore and seek better ways of doing things, like you eventually stumble upon good solutions.
Yeah, it came to my mind. Albert Einstein said that doing things the same way and expecting a different outcome is his basically explanation of insanity. So we have to do things differently if you
Yes.
want to stay safe, right? If you
Agreed.
want to stay sane. Cool. Okay, last question. So what would be your advice to like pharma companies?
Generally speaking, I think, one of the big takeaways that I've had being both within pharma as well as like outside and selling into pharma is just like, think about the practical implications of anything that you're doing. We all sort of, again, if you have like a scientific engineering background, as I do myself, like to think about the theoretical possibilities of just like, if I were to have the most perfect protocol and the cleanest data, like this is what it would look like. But the real world is a lot messier than people think. And so what I've generally seen being on the other side of the fence is that those idealistic thoughts about just like how a product should work in the market is just like not the reality of how people interact with it or the reality of the populations that you're trying to serve. So as a very specific example, just like, I remember basically developing some drugs where the characteristics like of the particular individuals that we would study in the protocol, this was like for a Parkinson's disease drug, were just like, were not aligned with actual disease patients. Like the specific characteristics that they wanted, it refined it down to such a tiny, tiny population that they almost just did not exist within reality. It led to a great scientific experiment where all the variables were controlled, but the reality is that a lot of these disease populations are not homogeneous, and then basically like you need to account for the fact that there's just a lot of variance within these populations. And so you want to make your products robust enough so that they can serve a lot of different needs versus just like the needs of a very select few that fit within your scientific profile.
Yeah, in marketing, that's something I've learned a long time ago. There's such a thing called growth marketing, which is sort of a scientist way to organize marketing, where you have scores for different experiments that you want to run, and then you interview everyone, and you try to get an unbiased answer for like what's the success rate you think this certain experiment like how successful you think it's going to be, what's the resources involved, and so on. So actually, there is a place for science in marketing as well. And that's how we rank the experiments I want to rank for platforms. Let's say we want to test a certain channel, and then I gather everyone's opinion on like what do you think is gonna, how do you think is gonna work? Like you just have to give it like a number. Do you think how much resources you'll need, and stuff like that. And basically, you get at the end you get a number, so you can look at it with an unbiased view, like a scientist. Say, okay, actually, I like this experiment, but it turns out this one would work might work better. So you go with your best hypothesis, right? Like, that's something from science that we've gotten here. Thank Sean. This is like fantastic. I
Well,
don't know. I guess you're in my top 5 guests that I've had so far.
I'm
I'm really
honored.
looking for like. I'm sorry that it doesn't. I can't record sessions longer than 40 minutes because people will just like leave. So I try to keep them engaged with shorter sessions. But I really want to interview you like maybe in a half a year time, in a year time. Maybe we could discuss like some other topics if you're open. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. Anytime.
Sean, thank you so much. And I'll see you maybe half a year from
All
here.
right. Take care, Stefan. Thanks.